Welcome, students, to Chapter 23. This lecture is going to focus on Part 1 of this chapter, talking about kind of general information about the digestive system, kind of what the different processes are, how we organize it, and so on and so forth. So why do we have a digestive system? What use is the digestive system? Of course, we use our digestive system every day, every time we eat. So that's one of our kind of functions for the digestive system. It's how we actually eat food. But in addition to our ability to eat food, we then have to break that food down into the actual nutrients that are in the food, because it is only those nutrients that can actually be absorbed by the body. Like you can't absorb a whole hamburger, but you can absorb the amino acids in the proteins in the meat of the hamburger. So that is also carried out by the digestive system. And then of course some of the stuff that we eat is not digestible, not absorbable or processable by our human digestive system. And so kind of the last function of the digestive system is to just kind of get rid of any of that indigestible material. So we eat the food, we process the food, we absorb the nutrients, and we get rid of any of the kind of non-usable bits of our diet. The digestive system is generally broken into two parts, what we call the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, the alimentary canal, which is essentially just a very muscular tube that runs from your mouth to your anus, that does all of the digestive processes. Everything that your digestive system does, it's generally the GI tract that is doing those things. So the kind of general flow is from the mouth into the pharynx or throat, into the esophagus, then into the stomach, then into the small intestine, then into the large intestine, and then the waste is excreted out the anus. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time, is talking about the GI tract. But then in addition to the GI tract, there are what we call accessory organs of the digestive system. These are things like the teeth, like the tongue, like your gallbladder and your liver, your salivary glands, your pancreas. And essentially what they do is they help the GI tract do its job. They might make some enzymes, they might kind of help break down the food, they might produce secretions that help us digest our food. And so they're not playing like a primary role in terms of what the digestive system is doing, but the digestive system and the GI tract wouldn't be able to do what it does without these accessory organs. So let's take a look. So let's follow the tract first. Let's see if it'll let me actually follow it here. So of course we're going to go into the mouth, into the oral cavity, down into the pharynx, down the esophagus, into the stomach. From the stomach we are then into the three parts of the small intestine. The duodenum is the first part, the jejunum is the middle part, and the ileum is the last part. The ileum then connects to the large intestine, which consists of the colon and the rectum. So the first part of the large intestine is the cecum here. Then we're into the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, finally into the sigmoid colon, and then the last part of the large intestine is the rectum, and of course the GI tract ends at the anus. So that's kind of the pathway through the GI tract. Up in the oral cavity, we've got the tongue and the teeth. They help break our food down, also give us our sense of taste, so on and so forth. The salivary glands, of which there are three primary ones. The parotid gland, which sits on the side of the face, the sublingual gland under the tongue, and then the submandibular gland under the mandible. Of course, they're going to make saliva. Saliva helps moisten our food, contains some digestive enzymes. So that's what we've got in terms of accessory organs in terms of the oral cavity. Down in the abdominal cavity, we have the liver, which is the largest gland in your body. It's a multi-lobed structure, has lots of functions for us. Not only does it make bile, which help us digest fats, it also does lots of processing of the nutrients that we get from our food. It does a lot of detoxification of stuff that might come in with our food. So the liver is very, very, very kind of important organ. And fun fact, it's one of the few organs in our body that can completely regrow. You can give someone a part of your liver, and that part of the liver will grow into a fully functioning liver, and the person who donated the part of the liver will regrow back to a full functioning liver, which is kind of neat. We also then have the gallbladder, which is this very small structure, essentially right here. You can actually live without your gallbladder. Essentially what it does is it stores bile, and again, bile helps us digest our fatty foods, so you have a little bit of issues with digesting fats if you don't have your gallbladder, but you can definitely live without it. And then we also have the pancreas sitting behind the stomach there. So you can see that right here, pancreas. And of course, we've talked about the pancreas before as part of the endocrine system, so it helps us regulate our blood sugar that way. But it is also the primary organ that gives us most of our digestive enzymes so that we can actually digest our food and break it down into all its little constituent pieces. So we'll go through the GI tract first, talking about kind of the functional anatomy of these different organs in the GI tract. And then we'll talk about the accessory organs. But before we get to talking about kind of the individual organs, let's just talk about what the GI tract does for us. All of the different kind of processes associated with the digestive system. The first of these is just ingestion, which is literally just the act of eating food, right? So that's going to take place in the mouth, right? It's where we put our food generally, unless you're a little kid, and then sometimes it ends up in strange places. So ingestion is kind of process number one. Then we also have what we call mechanical digestion or mechanical breakdown. And this is taking the foodstuffs and breaking it into smaller physical pieces. Not breaking bonds between any of the molecules, but just literally chewing, for instance, right? Physically making the food smaller. So that does occur in the mouth. It also occurs in the stomach with a little bit of kind of churning and kind of mixing there. It also occurs in the small intestine through a process called segmentation, which we're going to look at here in just a second. We also then have kind of chemical digestion, not just physically breaking down the pieces, but actually breaking the bonds between the molecules. And digestion happens for different foodstuffs. It kind of starts in different places. Carbohydrates tend to start getting digested in the mouth. Proteins tend to start getting chemically digested in the stomach. But most of the kind of chemical digestion takes place in the small intestine. And then, of course, kind of moving through the GI tract are propulsive forces. And there are several different types of propulsion type activities. Swallowing is a propulsion activity. Peristalsis, which I'm going to show you a video of, is a propulsion activity. We're talking about just moving what we call the bolus of foodstuffs through the GI tract, because once we ingest the food and we kind of compact it with our saliva and make that neat little kind of packet of foodstuffs, it's then called a bolus. And kind of moving that bolus through the parts of the GI tract is propulsion. Once we have our nutrients, Once we've got our food kind of broken down physically and chemically, then what we have occurring is absorption. So most of the absorption of our digestive system takes place in the small intestine. Carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and proteins tend to get absorbed into the blood, but fats get absorbed into the lymph fluid. So there's slightly different digestive processes in terms of mechanisms of absorption for the different types of nutrients in our food. And then once we have absorbed the kind of usable nutrients, whatever is left, waste and feces, is then defecated out the body and excreted, which is mostly a function of the large intestine and the rectum. So those are the digestive processes that are kind of generally carried out by the GI tract. And again, it's primarily the GI tract organs that carry out these digestive processes, but they really wouldn't be able to do that without the help of those accessory organs like the liver and the pancreas and so on and so forth. So one of the things that students tend to get a little confused on is the difference between peristalsis and segmentation. So peristalsis is the movement of the bolus of food. So essentially what's happening is the smooth muscle in the wall of the GI tract is contracting behind the little bolus of food, and it's just pushing the food through the GI tract essentially. Segmentation is about mixing the food. So the food moves backwards and it moves forwards. The muscle in the walls kind of contracts alternately with relaxation, contraction, relaxation, contraction, relaxation. And whilst in segmentation, some propulsion may occur, meaning the food is kind of moving through the GI tract. Segmentation is primarily about mixing the food and kind of bouncing it off each other and bouncing it off the walls of the GI tract, which helps break the food down physically. Kind of the opposite with peristalsis. Now, some mixing may occur with peristalsis, but peristalsis is primarily a propulsion activity, moving the foodstuffs through the GI tract. I'm going to show you a link. I'm going to post a link to a video of an x-ray of the intestines where you can see peristalsis and segmentation actually happening. You'll be able to access that here at the end of this little lecture, because it's really kind of cool to watch. So let's talk about what the kind of basic structure of the walls of the GI tract look like. Like many of the organs that we have looked at over the course of this semester, they follow a pretty similar setup. We've got a mucosal layer that lines the hollow organ, and then some submucosa connective tissue underneath that, and then a couple layers of muscle, and then some connective tissue kind of wrapping around the whole thing. So the mucosa is this layer here. The primary type of epithelium that lines the GI tract, or at least most of the digestive tract, is simple columnar epithelium. There's usually a little bit of connective tissue underneath that. It's usually where you'll find some glands. And then there is a small layer of what we call the muscularis mucosae, which is smooth muscle. It's just a thin layer of muscle, not primarily propulsive or segmentation type stuff, but helps the kind of mucosa do its job. And the mucosa, of course, is where all of the absorption is taking place. In some places, it's more protective in nature. So think esophagus, mouth, and anus, where we have, instead of simple columnar, usually a stratified tissue. There's a secretion that takes place in the mucosa as well. Again, I'll point out to these little glands here. The submucosa is mostly connective tissue. This is where most of our blood vessels are, most of our lymph vessels are. It's where most of our nerves are as well. You can see there's tons and tons and tons of nerves here in the submucosa, blood vessels in the submucosa. It also tends to have a little bit of elastic tissue in it, so that as stuff is moving through the GI tract, it can kind of stretch a little and then kind of recoil and still have its original shape. The next layer is the muscularis externa, of which there are generally 2 layers of smooth muscle. A circular layer that kind of goes around the whole organ, and then a longitudinal layer that runs the length of the organ. This is primarily where all of those segmentation and peristalsis movements are taking place by the contraction and relaxation of the smooth muscle in the muscularis externa. So all of what we call the motility, meaning the movement and mixing of the GI tract, is due to the nerve plexus, the nerve network here in the smooth muscle layers. And then wrapping around the whole of the GI tract, all the different organs of the GI tract, is serosa. So just a little bit of kind of mesothelium with a little bit of connective tissue underneath, just to kind of reduce some friction, add a little protection, and so on and so forth. So that is the kind of general structure of the GI tract. Now there are places in the GI tract where there are some kind of different modifications to the mucosa or to the muscularis, but the general plan is what you see here with this particular figure. The blood supply to the digestive tract is collectively called the splanchnic circulation. So this includes all of the arteries that branch off of the aorta that serve all of our digestive organs. So we're talking about the hepatic artery and the mesenteric arteries and the gastric arteries and the pancreatic arteries and so on and so forth. But then we also have that hepatic portal system that drains the digestive system into the liver, so that the liver can do all of our nutrient processing. So slightly different kind of blood flow out of the digestive organs than we would see with, say, the skin or something. In terms of the nerve system of the digestive tract, well, here's some kind of crazy news for you. Here's another little fun fact. You actually have more neurons in and around your digestive system than you do in your spinal cord. We refer to the digestive system, nervous system, as what we call the enteric nervous system, or the gut brain. And it is very, very, very well nerve networked. You can see all of this yellow and green here on the stomach and intestines. All of that is nerves, 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 nerves everywhere. So there are tons of what we call enteric neurons, meaning neurons that are associated with the gut. They exist in 2 nerve networks, what we call a nerve plexus. So there's a nerve plexus in the submucosa, which kind of turns on and turns off the activity of the glands, and then also that muscularis mucosae in the mucosal layers, and then the myenteric nerve plexus, which is the nerve network in the muscularis externa, is going to be responsible for kind of turning on and turning off and amplifying and slowing down the motility of the GI tract, so that segmentation and peristalsis type activities. So very, very, very well innervated system, the digestive tract. it gets not only all of these nerves, these enteric neurons, but of course we're going to get innervation from the autonomic nervous system as well. So the reflexes that govern the enteric nervous system have kind of two sources of triggers. So short reflexes are generally responding to stuff inside the GI tract, and so they're kind of regulated purely by the enteric nerves and that gut brain. And then the long reflexes can respond to stuff inside the GI tract, but also from outside of the nervous system, outside of the digestive system as well. So think about, like one time I walked into a grocery store and they were baking bread, and the smell of baking bread is just delicious. And I wasn't hungry, and I was instantaneously hungry when I smelled that. There was nothing going on in my digestive system. I didn't have any food in my digestive system at that point. But the smell of the deliciously baking bread triggered my digestive system to respond. So that would be a long reflex type of trigger. Now, the long reflexes can also respond to things inside the gut. So let's say muscle stretch, or the sense that there are proteins in the stomach. But the other difference between the short reflexes and the long reflexes is that the long reflexes are also going to, kind of in addition to all these enteric nerves, are going to involve the autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic system is, of course, rest and digest. So the parasympathetic nervous system is going to stimulate activity of the digestive system, and the sympathetic system, being our fight or flight system, is going to inhibit or kind of slow down the activity of the nervous system. So you can see here, if we look at some of the stimuli that might trigger a short reflex, so let's say maybe there's a little stretch in the GI tract as it kind of fills with food. Maybe the pH of the fluid inside the lumen of the organ might change, particularly if we eat something acidic or fat, which tends to break down into fatty acids. Or maybe we just sense that we've got some food in our stomach. We've got some sort of nutrient in our stomach or intestines, some sort of change in solute concentration. That kind of internal stimulus, again, sensed by chemoreceptors, mechanoreceptors in terms of the stretch, osmoreceptors in terms of solute concentration, can either just directly talk to the intrinsic nerve plexus, or perhaps talk to the central nervous system. If these receptors talk to the central nervous system, then we are involving a long reflex. If the receptors talk to the kind of gut brain, then that's a short reflex. Now, very often it's kind of all of the above. So in addition to these kind of internal stimuli that can start some of this GI activity, we also have external types of stimuli. Again, that's my example of I walked into the store and smelled the baking bread, or sometimes when you just eat food shows, right? I can't even watch food shows sometimes because I watch them cooking something and I'm like, oh my God, that looks good, and now I'm hungry. Right? Even though I perhaps wasn't hungry before I started watching the food show, the cooking show. The thought, the sight, the smell, even just the little bit of taste of food that we get might activate the central nervous system. That will then always talk to the gut brain. And then in terms of the effectors for the digestive system, we're either talking about turning on the activity of some of the glands associated with the digestive system. So either like glands internal in the digestive tract, or something like the pancreas or the liver, or the smooth muscle in the walls of the GI tract, kind of upping some of that GI motility. And then the response, of course, is some sort of change in either the kind of secretory activity of a gland, or perhaps some of the contractile activity of the muscularis. And so pretty much all of the digestive system processes kind of follow this reflex arc, where they can be triggered by both internal and external stimuli, regulated by both short reflexes that are entirely encapsulated within the GI tract, or those long reflexes that are going to involve the brain and central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system.